Good evening, I'm Farhana Sheikh. Our top stories for tonight: EU to suspend US countermeasures for 6 months, and Thailand-Cambodia border talks to be finalised on Thursday. More coming up on AWANI International. Our first top story for tonight: the European Union will suspend its 2 packages of retaliatory tariffs against the US for 6 months, which were due to take effect on August 7th. Now, the decision follows a deal struck with US President Donald Trump to allow time for further negotiations. The countermeasures were designed in 2 parts, one in response to US steel and aluminium duties, and the other targeting Trump's proposed baseline and car tariffs. The delay now marks a concession from one of Washington's largest trading partners, following weeks of talks between Trump and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen. Trump's executive order last week had imposed a 15% tariff on most EU goods. However, it excluded key carve-outs such as automotive vehicles and their parts. Right, negotiations over the Thailand-Cambodia border dispute are expected to conclude this Thursday during the General Border Committee meeting, says Prime Minister Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim. Anwar informs that the defence ministers of both countries are working together to maintain or extend the ceasefire and prevent further violations. Anwar expressed hope that Malaysia's coordination of the talks, fully backed by ASEAN, will lead to consensus and lasting peace. He also confirmed that the United States and China will attend as observers. He added that Putrajaya is ready to send a monitoring team to the border if requested by both sides. However, any decision on military deployment will be made later as the situation remains under control. Secretariat-level talks began on Monday at Wisma Perwira, a week after a fragile ceasefire brokered by Putrajaya ended 5 days of deadly clashes. The violence marked the worst conflict between the neighbours in over a decade, killing at least 43 and displacing more than 300,000 people. We have more after this break. Don't go anywhere.
Di era digital, pemasaran bukan hanya tentang penjualan semata-mata. Penceritaan menarik jadi kekuatan dalam membina hubungan perniagaan, tingkat pengetahuan, perkasakan perniagaan anda. Saksikan segmen Jiwa SME dalam program Awani Pagi dan Niaga Awani setiap Isnin hingga Khamis di saluran 501. Dibawakan oleh penaja utama jelajah Jiwa SME, Unify Business, rakan digital pilihan anda.
Welcome back. India has rejected United States and European Union criticism over its Russian oil imports, calling the focus on its trade post-Ukraine conflict unjustified and unreasonable. Therefore, it will continue to take all necessary steps to protect its national interests and economic security as any major economy would.
However, India gave no details on next steps but said its trade decisions are guided by economic self-interest, especially during global instability and geopolitical uncertainty. After the Ukraine war began, India became a key buyer of Russian oil, offering Moscow a crucial market after Europe sharply reduced its purchases. This move allowed India to cut energy costs significantly, while ensuring Russia's oil revenue continued through sustained demand from a new and willing partner. India explained it turned to Russian oil only after traditional suppliers redirected shipments to Europe, forcing India to seek alternative energy sources urgently. It also reminded critics that at the time, the United States encouraged India's Russian oil imports to stabilize disrupted global energy markets.
Japan has secured a $6.5 billion deal to build Australia's warships, its biggest defense export since 2014. Mitsubishi Heavy Industries will deliver upgraded Mogami-class multi-role frigates to the Royal Australian Navy starting from 2029.
The advanced warships are capable of anti-submarine warfare, surface strikes and air defense, and require only 90 crew members, half the number needed for Australia's current vessels. Australia plans to deploy the new ships to safeguard critical maritime trade routes and defend its northern approaches in the Indian and Pacific Oceans, where China's influence is growing. Australian Deputy Prime Minister Richard Marles said the frigates will give the Navy stronger power projection capabilities, which are essential in a more contested strategic environment. For Japan, the sale marks a significant step in expanding security partnerships beyond its alliance with the United States, as it counters China's rising military power in Asia.
Ukraine President Volodymyr Zelensky says its forces in northeastern Ukraine are currently fighting foreign mercenaries from China, Pakistan and African nations. He accuses Moscow of recruiting Chinese fighters, which Beijing denies, while North Korea reportedly sends thousands of troops to Russia's Caucasus region.
Zelensky said Ukrainian troops had reported foreign fighters from China, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Pakistan and several African countries taking part in the conflict. He pledged that Ukraine would respond to the presence of foreign forces supporting Russia in the ongoing war. In response to the allegation, Reuters contacted the embassies of Tajikistan, Uzbekistan and Pakistan in Kyiv for comment. At the time of reporting, Russia had not issued any public response to Zelensky's claim about foreign mercenaries.
Japan's chief trade negotiator, Ryosei Akazawa, travels to Washington on Tuesday to push for a swift implementation of the recent auto tariff deal. The agreement reached last month lowers United States tariffs on Japanese car imports from 27.5% to 15%, though no start date is announced.
Tariffs on other Japanese goods would also drop from 25% to 15% starting Thursday under the same trade agreement. Akazawa said Japan will urge the US to sign an executive order enacting the agreed tariff reduction on automobiles and components. He also raised concerns about stacking, where goods could face multiple tariffs, and sought exemption for items already taxed above 15%. A US executive order issued on July 31st listed a no stacking clause for the European Union but did not mention Japan. Akazawa said Japan has received assurances from the US that it will be treated equally to the EU regarding tariff stacking.
Brazil's Supreme Court has placed former President Jair Bolsonaro under house arrest ahead of his trial for plotting to overturn the 2022 election. The court orders the arrest, citing Bolsonaro's repeated violations of court restrictions and attempts to involve US President Donald Trump in the case.
The ruling banned Bolsonaro from using a mobile phone or receiving visitors except for lawyers or individuals authorized by the court. Bolsonaro's legal team confirmed the arrest and said they would appeal, arguing that he had not violated any judicial order. Supreme Court Justice Alexander de Moraes said Bolsonaro had persistently defied court rulings and that the judiciary would not tolerate such deliberate disobedience. The United States State Department condemned the arrest, accusing Moraes of weaponizing Brazil's legal system to suppress opposition and undermine democracy. Donald Trump denounced the trial as a political witch hunt and announced a 50% tariff on Brazilian goods effective Wednesday.
Israel will gradually permit the entry of food into Gaza through local merchants under a new mechanism. The Israeli military agency that coordinates aid, known as COGAT, says the move aims to increase the volume of aid entering the Gaza Strip while reducing reliance on collections by the UN and other international organizations.
The approved goods include basic food products, baby food, fruits and vegetables, and hygiene supplies. All items will be subject to inspection by Israeli authorities at border crossings before entering the strip. Israel had previously allowed goods into Gaza via the private sector between May and October 2024. The latest move comes amid a tight Israeli blockade that has left Gaza's 2.4 million population on the verge of a famine. The health ministry reported at least 180 people to have died from starvation and malnutrition since October 2023. Palestinian and UN officials say Gaza requires around 608 trucks per day to meet its humanitarian needs.
Meanwhile, Canada has carried out its first humanitarian airdrop over Gaza, delivering 21,600 pounds of essential aid supplies. This is after Ottawa criticized Israel for obstructing humanitarian efforts, calling it a violation of international law and demanding that these restrictions end immediately.
The Canadian Armed Force confirmed they completed their first airdrop over Gaza using Canadian aircraft, delivering humanitarian aid amid worsening conditions after nearly 2 years of conflict. Israel reported that 6 countries, Canada, Jordan, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Germany and Belgium, airdropped 120 food aid packages for civilians in Gaza. Canada also announced plans to recognize the state of Palestine at the United Nations in September, signaling increased diplomatic pressure on Israel. Israel, however, denies breaching international law and blames Hamas for the suffering in Gaza.
Still on Gaza, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu convenes his security cabinet this week to determine the next phase of Israel's military campaign in the enclave. This follows the collapse of indirect ceasefire talks with Hamas in Doha, where negotiators discuss a United States-backed proposal for a 60-day truce.
Reports indicated that Prime Minister Netanyahu is considering expanding the military offensive and possibly seizing full control of the Gaza Strip. A government source reportedly confirmed that Netanyahu is leaning in that direction, though what constitutes a full military defeat remains undefined. Some Israeli leaders have proposed annexing parts of Gaza as a strategy to pressure Hamas into making concessions. The previously proposed plan, discussed in Doha, included a 60-day truce with aid deliveries and the release of half the hostages in exchange for Palestinian prisoners. U.S. envoy Steve Witkoff visited Israel last Saturday and discussed a broader plan to end the war, which Israeli officials viewed as highly significant.
U.S. Attorney General Pam Bondi has ordered prosecutors to open legal proceedings into claims that Donald Trump's political rivals conspired to falsely accuse him of colluding with Russia ahead of the 2016 election. Prosecutors will reportedly present evidence to a grand jury, which will then decide if formal charges should be filed.
The move followed claims by U.S. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard last month that former President Barack Obama and his security team led a years-long coup against Trump. Gabbard alleged that the Obama administration politicized intelligence on Russian meddling to falsely link Trump to Moscow. Democrats, however, argued that Gabbard's claims don't undermine a 2017 U.S. intel report that concluded Russia tried to hurt Clinton's campaign and help Trump win. Trump, who beat Hillary Clinton in the 2016 race, has long dismissed the Russiagate allegations as a smear campaign. The development also came as Trump faces fresh scrutiny over his administration's handling of documents tied to the Jeffrey Epstein investigation.
That wraps up AWANI International. Stay tuned for reports on the rivalry strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more and be sure to follow our social media accounts. I'm Farhana Sheikh. Thank you for watching.